Hello and welcome to The Extras, where we take you behind the scenes of your favorite TV shows, movies, and animation, and they're released on digital, DVD, Blu-ray, and 4K, or your favorite streaming site. I'm Tim Millard, your host. Sometimes the stories behind our favorite movies can really enhance our love for the movie itself. The original 1978 Superman and subsequent Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut, is one of those stories that I find fascinating and is really a terrific home entertainment story. And to tell that story, I have three very special guests on to talk about restoring the original 1978 Superman for the DVD release. As many Superman fans know, the original Superman was envisioned as two films, and director Dick Donner was filming them simultaneously. There was a very public falling out between Donner and the Salkinds, the producers of the film, and eventually that led to his dismissal, even though he had already filmed around 75% of that second film. It's one of the great behind-the-scenes film stories, and we'll get into it both in this episode and a second Superman episode, which will be specifically on Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut. And if you're wondering why we are talking about this now, well, this film is part of a new 5-film box set of the Superman films coming out on 4K. And this is releasing on May 9th as part of Warner Brothers' 100th anniversary celebration. Now I want to introduce you to my three guests. Jonathan Gaines was most recently Vice President Creative Content at Warner Brothers Home Entertainment, where he worked for 15 years. And he has been a producer of extras since the days of Laserdisc, and I had the privilege of working with him for about 12 years while I was there. Derek Hoffman is currently Vice President of Development and Production at the Donner's Company and has worked with the Donner Company in various roles since 2000. Michael Thaw is a producer, director, and editor who has worked on The Goonies and the Lethal Weapon series, and he restored Superman the movie for the initial DVD release, and he produced and edited Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut. I can't think of three guests more qualified to speak to our topic today, so I think you'll really enjoy the conversation. Jonathan, Derek, Michael, it's great having you on the podcast today.
Hi.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here, Tim. Thanks.
Well, let's start with you, Michael. But before we dive into the discussion of Superman the movie, I did want to get a little background on how you guys first kind of tied in with the Donners. And we'll start with you, Michael. How did that, when was your first interaction with Richard and his wife, Lauren Donner?
Well, they weren't married. I'm sorry. They weren't married at the time. But I started, I met him on the toy in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. But I wasn't working for him. I was working for the editor. And then I ended up on Lady Hawk, which he cut in the basement. I'm sorry, in the quarters, the help's quarters at his house while he was rebuilding his house, and then because I was so outspoken, I think Lauren and Dick were kind of impressed. Stewart, the editor, was horrified that I opened my mouth, because apprentice or assistant editors should keep their mouth shut. And they both asked me to be their assistant. She wanted me to be her assistant on St. Elmo's Fire. He was about to do Goonies. And I decided to work with the director rather than the producer, but it wasn't anything to do with Lauren. They were already in love because of Lady Hawk, and soon got married on Thanksgiving Day. I forgot what year.
That's awesome.
86.
And then Derek, how did you first interact with the Donners?
I started out, I was in LA just trying to get a little work while I was here for a couple of weeks. And I wandered into an interview on a movie that I didn't know what it was. And it turned out to be the X-Men. And I'm a huge comic nerd. And I was like, is this X-Men? And I turned to the person to my right and started peppering them with questions. And it ended up being Kevin Feige, who was Lauren's assistant at the time. And he and Jeff Johns were both getting ready to make their moves outside of the Donner's company. So they brought me in, and I started out as the errand guy, and I worked with the Donners, still do, was with Dick for 23 years.
And that was back in what, 99 or?
It was 2000.
2000. And then
Yep.
Michael, for you, Toys goes all the way back to, do you remember what year?
82, I think.
82. Wow. That's way back. And then Jonathan.
And I started working directly for them on Goonies, which would have been early 86. So
fun fact on Goonies, Michael's the first face you see in the Goonies.
Yeah.
He's one of the convicts walking out of the prison.
You see here in the picture. I also helped out as a cameraman as well, too.
For those on the audio podcast, Mike was just holding up a picture, so you have to check that out on the video version of the podcast. But so then, Jonathan, how did you kind of get looped into this group? Was it on Superman the movie restoration?
It was, yes. My first introduction to Richard was on Superman. I was an independent DVD content producer for Warner Brothers, working with Paul Hemstreet, who was the head of the department at the time. And he told me that they're starting up Superman and that would I like to produce the special features and the special edition. And of course, I jumped at the opportunity, and that's how I was introduced to Michael, who was already set up on the lot at Warner Brothers, working on the research for the restoration. And then that's how I met Derek as well, and Jeff Johns at the time. And it was the first of many more Richard Donner films that I had the pleasure of producing the bonus features for, including Goonies and Timeline and Lethal Weapon.
I'm sorry. Jonathan was accomplished DVD special features producer at that point anyway. He had a great license plate on his car as well, too. What was it, Jonathan?
It was DVD Guru. And I was ahead of my time because people would say to me, "Is your name David Guru?" And then I would explain to them it's DVD Guru. And then still early on the days, you'd be like, DVDs? What's that? Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I remember being on the set of Lethal Weapon 4 doing some shooting, and people would say to me, "What are you doing here? What are you here shooting for?" And I'd say the DVD, and they're like, "What?" They would look at me with contempt that I was shooting for the DVD at that time.
On 4? DVDs weren't.
I was on set in China.
They were. Okay.
All
right.
Yeah.
Well, we both worked for Paul, and interestingly enough, I called Paul Hemstreet. Yeah. And I said, Paul, if I were to have somebody come on the podcast to talk about Superman, who would you suggest? And of course, he suggested you, Jonathan. And then he said, through you would know Eric and Michael, and you guys would be able to talk about it. So I'm really excited about our discussion today. And it's kind of fun to just see how you guys all originally got hooked into the circle of Dick Donner and Superman. So let's go now to Superman, the DVD. Michael or Jonathan, tell us, how did it originally come up, and who pitched who, and how did that story all come about?
Okay, well, I'm going to let Jonathan do most of the lion's share of this, but the way it came up was that DVDs were beginning to surface, standard definition, not Blu-rays, and I was looking for some work, and so I said to Dick, "Why don't we pitch Warner Brothers on making a DVD of Superman 1, restore it, remix it," because it was really pretty much mono, the original mix, and do a bunch of special features on it. And we came up with some wonderful special features. I'll let Jonathan tell you about all that. But so a gal that worked for Dick named Cece Niebuhr knew someone in the home video department, which was just a fledgling department at that point. And it was Paul's boss. It was the guy that was the head of that. And we pitched him on it, and he said yes. Little did he know how much money we were going to spend. Okay, Jonathan, you take over from there.
I mean, this was the early days of DVD. The explosion was just starting, and all the studios, including Warner Brothers, were looking at their libraries and seeing how they could bring back out beloved films. And Superman is at the top of the list for a lot of people, including myself. And the opportunity to tell a proper behind the scenes documentary and really shine light on the history of this film and its accomplishments was a golden opportunity. And a lot of us had already known a lot of about some of the backstory about it and the drama behind the scenes with Dick and Tom Mankiewicz and the Salkinds and all of that. And but there had never been any kind of true documentary that looked at it from a filmmaking perspective. So the opportunity to do that was a dream come true for me personally. And we got started on that, and it ended up becoming a great like archaeological dig to find the materials that we utilized, and it was a gold mine that we eventually uncovered to work with.
So then you took it to Paul or Paul's boss, and you guys pitched that we'll do a restoration and we'll do the documentaries?
Well,
Uh,
if I remember correctly, it was already the restoration. I think when I came on board, it was already underway because Michael had an
right,
office on the
right.
lot
Like
already, and then I was brought in to work on the documentaries and also to assist
special
Michael in any way that I could on the restoration. And I had some previous experience doing restoration work on some Laserdisc projects beforehand and all that, so it was exciting to be a part of that as well. But yeah, my particular focus was on the documentaries and working on securing interviews and writing up
but
the drafts
Jonathan, we
of the
did
pieces.
many special features that no one has ever done
Yes.
since, like the standalone music that is in sync with the film, so you could turn off the sound of the film and listen to just the music. And then we had
Yeah,
all
the
those
music
cast.
only track. Yes, the
Huh?
music only track was yes, the
It
music
was
only
in
track was
5-1.
something that was unique to DVDs.
It was in 5-1 too. No one's ever done that before since I think. And we had all those casting tests uh, uh, that were shot in 35, and many other things that we threw on there. Oh yeah, the TV commercials, the feature, the teaser, everything. We threw the kitchen sink at it.
Well,
It
Mike,
was
to get those assets, first you had to get the all of the film itself, which was over in the UK, wasn't it? Tell us a little bit about how you got the assets sent to you.
okay. So Warner Brothers had the final negative here in the United States, Technicolor. Um, the outtakes, the B-neg, as we call them, everything that wasn't in the final cut was in the UK at some of it was at Technicolor. The extended cuts. I'm sorry, guys. This is just DWP working outside my house. If you can hear that, I can't do anything about it. Is it loud?
No,
It's
it's
okay.
fine. It's fine, Michael.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So Technicolor had the longer cuts of different scenes and the additional scenes that the Salkinds had cut to extend their TV broadcast version because they were being paid by the minute. And so they wanted to, so the film, which was way too long to begin with, 2 hours and 43 minutes, I pitched Dick to make it shorter. I had a couple good cuts.
Well, I was just gonna say, before you get to the logistics of all that,
Yeah.
and there's the Dick Donner perspective of it, which was a fascinating thing of like his trust in Michael being paramount, to letting something which is a very vulnerable thing to him. Like for him, he would talk about going back and revisiting these movies and that time.
The first one he was very, very happy with, though.
Oh, he was happy. He was happy with the whole thing, but just the idea of going back, because he's always like, that was my movie and shut it off. Right. And the idea that people would want to see these things, he didn't understand. It was not, in his realm of experience. So, working with Jonathan, he would always talk about how you two specifically, and that your love of it and your love of the process that he went through was one of the only reasons he could allow this to happen, and not because as a director like he is, he's such a control freak. He's such that thing. And to be able to let other people come in and explore these things was, I mean, Michael, like it's a big deal for Dick to let go of minutia control for a lot of things. And it was a testament to the both of you that he trusted you so much and would allow this. And he was continually flabbergasted by the extent of which you found things and were able to grow each part of the journey.
That's more of the Superman 2 experience, I think. The Superman 1 experience, he only watched it twice with me. One at the beginning, where we ran the 70 millimeter split surround, which there was only like 3 or 4 theaters in the world or in the US that could run split surrounds, which is essentially 5.1. Back in 78 when it came out. We ran it once. He couldn't believe it sounded so mono. I said, we've had the Dolby guys here in the theater checking out everything so that you're hearing what your mix was. And he wanted it to become bigger and all that kind of stuff. And then I found that there was a lot of optical printing problems that I could fix. And the whole thing of Superman 1 was done on film. There was no video fixing of anything. It was all finished on film. And then we spent a huge amount of money remixing it. And what the fans don't realize is that the 3 or 4 signature sound effects that we kind of changed a little bit, which I have been hammered on for the last 25 years or whatever it is. Like when Superman goes into the door and because he can't find a place to change while she's up falling off the helicopter, they called it sounded like a boomerang sound effect, okay? What they don't know is we replaced every sound effect in the film. Every car screech, every whoosh, everything. But the only thing they cared about was their boomerang sound in the...
So, Mike, I wanted to ask you, did you restore the Superman, not the one that was extended, as well for the DVD?
I did both, yeah.
Yeah. And then, Jonathan, I was watching some of the behind-the-scenes feature that you guys created, and it looked like you had filmed even like some of the unloading of the assets and opening of the canisters. Is that all of the stuff that was being sent over from the UK?
Yeah. Well, some of it was, and some of it I think was also probably found in the salt mines
No,
in the U.S.
we shot that here, opening
No,
up
I
the
know that
canister.
we shot the B-roll of all of that material, but all that material, all that film footage was what was uncovered in the search for the film assets,
The film
whether it was in the
assets
U.S.
is the story, Tim, that you read. Hopefully, I mean, I think you did.
Yes.
Was I went to England and they kept on telling me that all the sound didn't exist, all the production sound, and so I went to England to shoot one of the three documentaries on how the special effects were done with one of the special effects supervisors. And I said, okay, I want to go see this storage facility that, you know, all the stuff was stored at. And it was a non-temperature controlled, not even a warehouse. It was worse than that. And stuff was just lying around. Reels were kind of half open. I found a lot of that 16 millimeter footage that was shot for the making of, that they didn't use in the making of, because they didn't want to show how a man could fly behind the scenes. They just wanted Chris to be on camera, so they shot some other stuff. And so I found all the stuff of the behind the scenes of Dick directing and all that kind of stuff. It was all shot on 16. And then I found not only all the B-roll negative, but I'm sorry, that wasn't the B-roll negative, wasn't there? That was a Technicolor. But I found a couple boxes, and they said Superman M1 4, M6 X2, and I was like, wait a second, that's the way we designate music. And it turned out to be John Williams' original recordings. And we had access to the original mix downs into 6-track of Jonathan Williams' iconic score. And that was the beginning of the restoration.
So I guess the point that I was trying to make there, Jonathan, is that you guys planned the documentary even before you got the asset so that you could film all of this stuff. You had pitched all of that at the same time. It wasn't just the restoration. It was the restoration and telling the story of the restoration, and then all of the other things that came out once you found the assets, added to more extras that you created, the TV spots and other things that you found after you started going through all of the boxes of material and things of that nature. Do I have that right?
I think it was, we knew we wanted to tell stories. I think the idea of coming up with three different pieces, although it's actually like it's a part one and part two, and then a third piece on the special effects, was based on the bounty of material that was uncovered and had never seen the light of day. It was incredible to look through all this material, and we would string it up on a bench and just go through it, and I would look at the 16 millimeter and see kind of where, with a loop to see what we had here, and then we would eventually get it transferred. But it was, I mean, if you can imagine just seeing something that hadn't been seen since it was shot, more than likely, it was an incredible revelation and a bounty of great material to work with. So that's kind of what started, us to kind of see what we can talk about, what do we have materials to support. And then it was starting out doing interviews, and we started, I think one of the very first interviews we did was John Williams. We interviewed him, and then from there we went and
No, he was
we
much later.
started, we booked all of our interviews. We went and
I think
we
Margot is
got
one of the
Margot.
earlier ones.
Margot.
Hey, Derek, what do you remember about that time period?
I just remember that, Dick's, his sort of, in a fascinating Donnerism, is that sort of, duality of, he'd be like, oh, I just got to let them go do it. Let's see what they're doing about this. Let's see what they're doing about this. It was very like, he would be like, I have to let them do it. I have to let them do it. But every time I do remember a couple times, Michael, you coming in to show him something or try to and he would be sort of like, I don't know if you got the reactions you needed in the moment and everything, and then you leave, but then he would be thinking about it, and he would just be like, you could
On
see like the
Superman
gears
1,
would race. Yeah. Yeah. It would whatever you would bring him in and tell him and talk about would
because
be afterwards. He'd think about
with
it,
with the film itself, all we did was polish it up on
Right.
Superman
But
1.
even to
Superman
that,
2 was the one that he was really, I mean,
right. But
well,
even that, you just polishing anything up. You guys you doing anything with it
he could
was
have come
always,
in at any time and said,
of course.
that's too colorful, or this, that, those, that. By the way,
But
that
that was
was,
the thing, is he also couldn't, because if he stepped in a little bit, he was going to step in like forever.
yeah.
So it was that thing of, he was letting you do your stuff and knowing you were always checking in with him and telling him this stuff. But he would think about it when it was done, and he was engaged as much as he could allow himself to be without going, all right, here's how we're going to do it.
What films were you guys developing or shooting in year 1999 or 2000?
Well, that was the prep for Timeline, which before he was
Really, that's
getting ready to do
really
Timeline.
back then.
Yeah, because it ended up
No,
kept getting pushed
Jonathan
because of,
finished Superman before he went on to Timeline.
because there was
Oh,
mad
prep,
cow
prep.
disease, and there was that movie got shut down several times, and there was a
And,
writer's
and,
strike and
and it
blah blah
was a
blah.
different studio as well, too.
Yeah, so it was like, that Andy was building a house because that's what he did in his downtime.
Well, I think now is kind of a time that I actually want to go back. This might seem strange, but we should really outline for everybody exactly how Superman and Superman 2 were being filmed simultaneously, which is like such an extremely unique and important part of the story.
Thank
And
you.
I don't know which one of you want to dive in on this, but how did that? What do you know about that part of the story and Dick Donner coming on board with Mankiewicz, that team, and the Salkinds to actually get Superman launched? And why did they decide to do filming of both films simultaneously?
Any,
Well,
any,
there's the Salkinds were famous for having done the Three Musketeers and doing a really behemothly long movie, and then famously cutting it and doing it in two, but not trying to not pay anybody for the second one. So they were experienced in
but
that, and their idea of being able to get something going that large was not new to them.
so they did the Three Musketeers with Richard Lester as director. We won't talk about him too much in this interview, but so he shot a ton of material, and they put out the Three Musketeers. It was successful, and so they just cut the other material and put out, and probably did some reshoots, and didn't pay anyone, and then they put out the Four Musketeers, and I forgot if that did well. But Superman 1, they got that idea of doing two films at the same time because it would save money, which it does save money if you're using the same sets and all that kind of stuff. But Superman 1 and 2, which Dick shot 100% of Superman 1 and 75% of Superman 2, before they had to stop shooting additional scenes for Superman 2 to get Superman 1 out the door, because already had missed a release date of summer of 78, and so they pushed it back to Christmas. So it was a mad rush to.
Well, see, they also had, they had Brando and Hackman, and they had there was the dates and everything. And I think when it was so big, and Dick and Tom, when they came in and rejiggered the story, it was like there's enough for two. The Salkinds were they knew how to do two. They could do it all.
The
Mario Puzo
yeah,
script is, I used to have it here, but and so it was, and for Dick and Tom, it was the chance to tell that big of a story and do that big of a thing altogether. And they had too much story for one. And if the producers were going to let them do two, they said, great.
No, I think they were down for shooting two films. They weren't down for as much money as they were being offered, but they still wanted to do it because they didn't want Superman to fly away and become a European production. It had to be American. And so they shot both at the same time. And like I said, they only shot 75% of the second one. And when the first one was being made in the trades here in the United States, they report on films in production. And the trades, Variety and Hollywood Reporter and stuff like that, kept on saying that Donner's going wildly over budget and this film is going to be a disaster and all this kind of stuff. What they didn't say in the trades was they were shooting two films at the same time. So if you cut that budget in half, all of a sudden you're talking about a reasonable big film. And so Dick and Tom got nervous and said, look, if we're going to have number one come out and it's not a huge success, we're never going to go back and be able to finish Superman 2. So they took the ending of Superman 2, which was the most spectacular thing in both films, put it on the end of one, and they said, all right, on Superman 2, we'll figure out how to end it at that point. And so one came out, was a big success. Brando and Hackman and Prine and Ned Beatty had already been shot for both films at the beginning because they were the most expensive actors, so you want to use them and then get rid of them. The Salkinds paid Brando like $2.3 million for 11 days of work. He was willing to come back later to shoot more for Superman 2 for free because of Dick. And they put it out. It was a big success. And the Salkinds ended up paying Brando tens of millions of dollars in profit participation worldwide. And so they announced that they were not going to use Brando in the second one. They were going to reshoot his stuff with Susanna York. And Dick and the Salkinds got into this media war in the trades. And finally, they just sent him a telex saying that your services were not needed for Superman 2, and they hired Richard Lester, partially to pay him off of what they owed him for Musketeers 4, but and he kind of made a different film out of it.
Well, it's a fascinating story. It's very complex, and I don't know that we'll get into all the details of it, but of course, people have written about it, and it's such a really unique piece of TV history. But I know that when you guys were actually going back and trying to restore for the DVD, the first Superman, and you were going to the UK, you were getting these, 6 tons of of assets being shipped over and things of that nature. Part of the reason why we're talking about so many assets was because really you're talking about not just one film, but you're talking about
No. At the beginning,
films, right?
they only sent over the 6 tons for the first film stuff.
Really? That's just for the first film. Okay.
It was in 2005 that they sent over the other 6 tons for the Superman 2 material. But I needed the original negative, the B neg, as I call it, to remake all the opticals over again. Like at the beginning, all those white, the white Krypton shots where you're pushing in, they were all model shots. They were done on these optical printers that didn't have steady exposure, so they would flicker. So if you watch a laser disc of the last version before I got a hold of it, you can see it flickers everywhere because Stewart tricked out everything with optical effects, sped up, slow down. It's all he does everything, and
And
nowadays
to clarify, that's editor Stuart Baird.
Stuart Baird.
And he had 2 editing rooms going on. I think I had read, one on one film and one on the others as the dailies came in and everything. So,
right.
Yeah.
And he could keep up with the cutting because they could only shoot so much in a day. So, and he was a fast editor. So, he would get the dailies. He would screen them with Dick. Dick would say what he wanted, what takes he didn't like, everything. Don't use that shot. And then Stuart would go to the one cutting room and shoot the dailies for Superman 1, or go to the other cutting room because he had actually 2 separate cutting rooms and cut for Superman 2 because they were planning on finishing both films at the same time.
So you've got all the assets now and you've begun the process of the restoration. What were some of the things that needed to be fixed or upgraded? Were there some effect shots that needed to be redone or?
Jonathan?
I mean, I remember most specifically it's the scene where Lois is hanging off the end of the building from the helicopter, and that's the iconic shot of Superman running across the street to head to the spinning door. He then comes out, and then there's I guess at the time was a pimp saying, "Say, Jim," and
Hey, Jack,
and,
that's a
and he
cool
takes off.
outfit.
But sorry, I've got no time. He takes off, and there was like a scratch on the shot, and I remember that was like one must fix blemishes that had to be taken care of because it was so prominent and it had carried over in all like the previous versions
and that
of the
was
film.
That was an easy digital fix. We also had other takes of that as well too, so we could steal that little part of it.
I think that was a lot of the cleanup too. Was a lot of that, and then a big part of the fix was correcting the color on Superman's costume because it turned green.
We shot blue screen back then. His costume was blue, so they didn't have time to massage the color correction between the elements. So there were certain shots they had finished that looked good, but there were some others and that was Dick's biggest thing: make his suit look blue. Make his suit look blue.
And then there was also these cloud shots.
I might have gone overboard with that a little bit. I got hammered on Superman 2 for having too much red in that film.
Michael, wasn't there also these cloud shots that needed to be fixed?
And that was a very interesting story. So the background of the clouds was a Paramount stock shot. And once you've licensed a piece of film, it wouldn't have cost much anyway, but you have that license forever. So they gave us that shot over again, and we recomposited, taking out most of the grain of all that digitally. And so that's why it looks so much better in the restoration. And then of course we printed back out to film because everything had to be finished on film. Superman 1.
I think I read too that when it came to the audio restoration, and you mentioned it briefly earlier in our discussion here, but I think to go into it a little bit deeper, that was a big thing that as Dick was listening to it and watching it with you, that you guys noticed this whole mono. It's like, where's the stereo? Like there should be more sound, and it felt very mono. And
In
that
'78, they were very scared of doing this with the
and
sound.
it was an early day of surround sound. Is that what it was, or the 70 millimeter 6 track?
Okay, so in Star Wars was the first film, I think, or one of the first films that was done in Dolby Stereo.
Right.
So that was center, left, right, mono surround. There was a format that Dolby had that was called split surrounds, and Dick always wanted the biggest and the best for everything he did. So they actually made a 70 millimeter mix that, as I said, was only in 4 or 5 theaters in the US that had that format, but still, it was still basically mono. They were very scared to put anything back there because they were scared that we get lost in the theater and whatever. So yeah, Dick wanted it to be Superman was dying to be a very dynamic sounding film, and we certainly did it.
Well, I remember being on the soundstage and pushing you, Michael, to
Oh yeah,
have the mix be done more
more,
aggressive, more aggressive use of the surrounds and
right?
get things
And the
moving
mixers
around. And
are looking back at me, glaring, and I'm saying, no, he's right. Put it back there. Put it back there. Put it
I
back
mean,
there.
I remember like one of the scenes being when the Phantom Zone captures or starts flying over the dome, and it goes from
The Phantoms,
um, the foreground over to the background, and then just like really tracking that over our heads
right?
so that we can hear it go past us a few times, and then just pushing the directional use of the space. I mean, here, I was a huge home theater buff at the time, and knew the value of leveraging those surround sound speakers and putting a lot of movement in them and filling them up and making it feel like a much more immersive sound experience. And when you've got the sound, the music in 6 tracks, putting those fully out in the surrounds as well, not just in the front lefts and the front speakers. And it made for a really great demo disc at the time too for home theater demonstration.
Yeah, Jonathan was on the soundstage a lot, and when he wasn't in the mixing room, he was back in the projection room, going through all the 16 millimeter
Yep.
footage, looking for B-roll to put in the documentaries. Those documentaries came about kind of gradually. We developed the story, which I had first heard Tom and Dick telling the story of the whole rigmarole in the cutting rooms of Lady Hawk, and then from there we read all the materials that had been published about it. Jonathan and I, we developed a story. Jonathan wrote a script. When we did the documentary and I showed it to Dick and Lauren asked me who wrote your dialogue, and I said, well, it's Jonathan Gaines, and she was very impressed with that.
You had Taking Flight, Making Superman, and The Magic Behind the Cape. Those are the 3 documentaries you created?
Right. Taking
Correct.
Flight and The Making Superman was originally a 1 hour piece, and we're not going to go into why it had to get split up. But I mean, I went to the SAG offices. They allowed me to leave it as one, and then a lawyer at Warner Brothers came in and said, no, you can't do that. And so we had to make it into 2.
So that's the one you're talking about, that you showed to Dick and Laura.
Yeah, those are the two. Yeah, and that's the one that Mark McClure, who played Jimmy Olsen, was our host for. So we split that into two. And then we had so much material and we found all this great test footage of how they were going to make Superman fly that we then decided we could do a separate special effects piece because that was the groundbreaking achievement in visual effects at that point. Is as the poster had said, "You'll believe a man can fly," and we wanted to show how they made
no computers involved.
Yeah.
And that was
all
Dick and Tom always said the movie didn't work until they came in that one time and saw it work, and then they went, "Oh my gosh, we can do
that one particular shot. That was not a special shot. That was a wire shot of him when he becomes Superman, and there's a glass face, and then it turns around, and you go through the eye, and he's standing there at the end of the Fortress of Solitude, and then he slightly leans forward, and then he starts flying the camera, and he flies past us. And all we had to do is they had to remove the wires. And Dick said that's when they were sold. Everyone started cheering after that take because,
But the funny thing about that take is that it was the shot that proved they could make it believable. But then I think after the take, someone said, or they noticed it maybe in dailies, this perfect shot at the very end. If you watch it, there's a shadow that crosses Chris's face.
Oh, God.
That they were a little disappointed in, but they were like, we're not going to do this again. But that's the shot.
And it's still there, the shadow?
The shadow is still there. It still crosses his face as he's going out of the screen at the top.
God.
Yeah.
So there you have.
I think Dick mentions that in the commentary track.
Oh.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you, who did you get to participate and who kind of politely declined or wasn't available, Jonathan?
For the documentary?
Yeah. Sit-down interviews. You mentioned John Williams already. Yeah.
John Williams, we had Margot Kidder. We obviously had Christopher Reeve, which was I had the honor of interviewing Chris at his house in upstate New York, and flying there and interviewing, and it was,
on the same
it was a dream come true.
On the only day that honor had available for this documentary.
Right. So I was in New York interviewing Chris, and Michael's in LA interviewing Dick.
Dick, on the same day.
Yeah. So
the Margot trip was amazing, going to Montana.
Yeah. Yeah.
In Montana, all the hotel rooms are very, very short because they were built a long time ago. And we stayed.
She was living in Bozeman, Montana. We flew out there, Michael and I, and we get to town. And I think we checked into the hotel and we're like, "Oh, we're here to interview Margot Kidder." And the woman receptionist was like, "Oh, Margie.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Margie. She lives down the road. Go up to the corner, make a right." Everybody in town knew Margot as Margie. And this was Bozeman, Montana, before it became Bozeman that everyone knows now and is mentioned in Yellowstone all the time.
It was
a very small town.
Black and white. There was horses strung up in front of the bar. It was really a dichotomy because the hotel was very period, but the bar that was kind of a standalone thing in front, you walked in and they're playing Tom Petty. And no one has an accent. You would think they all would have, a Southern accent. It was like being in Southern California. And when Margot Kidder took us out to dinner that night or the next night or whenever it was, no, it was the night that we interviewed her. Maybe not the first day we were there, but it was this old, decrepit building. And when you walked in, it was like the fanciest restaurant in Malibu.
Wow. And then who did you?
It was because Kevin Costner. It's because Kevin Costner owns the ranch there, and they keep it really nice.
There you go.
Now, I mean, we're
That's true.
talking, this is back in 2000 that you guys are doing these interviews roughly. So we're, 23 years removed. Who did not get interviewed for this that you maybe wanted to have interviewed?
The Saul Kinds.
It's all kinds. I think obviously Marlon Brando. We didn't
Did we
interview
try that?
Ned Beatty. We may have. I'm sure we may have tried. I'm sure we tried. I think
I did
we
get
got
Hackman. I got Hackman for
yes.
5 minutes. They had me on a clock.
Yeah,
I
he was
used
doing the
almost
press
every
junket
second of that
for.
interview.
Yeah, he was
Mooseport?
doing the press junket for The Replacements, the football movie with Keanu Reeves, and
Right.
it was a Warner Brothers movie. So they were able to get Michael a slot at the junket really
Right.
quickly, but to do that. But if I remember correctly, the reason why so many people did participate, especially like Gene and Chris and Margot, was because I believe it was Dick that had sent letters or faxes back in the day legitimizing this project and saying I'm involved in it. These are good guys. Please, if you would be so kind as to participate, it'd be great. And that opened up a lot of doors and really gave us the opportunity to interview people that probably hadn't talked about these movies in a long time. And given that there was a lot of drama and maybe some bad feelings left over from how things played out for the second film, gave a lot of people a lot of opportunity to say with the hindsight of time to say kind of what was really going on at the time, and I
And
think that
again,
was what
going
was
back, we
interesting.
shot both films at the same time as well too. So
Yeah. Yeah. Who else did we get? We got Lynn Stallmaster, who was the casting
yes,
director, who discovered Chris
he
Reeve,
was
and
he was one of our first interviews. We interviewed people that were appropriate for the script that Jonathan developed for the making of. So we didn't actually go after Valerie Perrine or Ned Beatty because they weren't integral into the story of the making of. Hackman was.
yeah,
I'm sure that we tried for Brando. I'm sure we tried for Brando, but
yeah.
he might have been not well at the time as well too. I don't know. 99.
Derek, what's your recollection of that time, and the involvement of the Donners there?
Well, honestly, it's really funny. I found we were moving offices, and I literally found the file, Jonathan, with those letters last 2 weeks ago.
Really? Oh, that's
Yeah,
Oh,
amazing.
with
give us
the
copies,
original,
please.
like with CC's. It,
This was
but I mean,
Superman 1, Superman 2 letters.
yeah, no, it was Superman 1. To what I was saying earlier, that was Dick. That was his modus operandi. Was he knew that if he believed in it and if he could buy into what they were doing and he could build that, then he could lend his credibility to it, and he would. But he would say, in it, these guys are doing this on my behalf. They have my backing. They are, so that when they were approached, everyone knew that it was being done, with the way that he wanted, which was important to a lot of people because of the fallout from Superman 2. So knowing that Dick was being part of this and that he was not only okay with it, but he was literally part of it, I think was big for a lot. I mean, I remember having the conversation with Margot about how important it was that Dick's, that he was okay with everything being done with Superman from their point of view afterwards, because it was his drive, that really
Baby.
galvanized everything in the first place. And they all felt it was amazing, Jack O'Halloran, Sarah, the Terrence, all of like the reverence with which people would have a conversation with me who they had never met before about Dick and about how he pulled that movie through and what he did, and everyone's sort of perspective on Dick and Tom's relationship too, and like that dynamic was always great, but it carried such weight, and the emotion with everyone involved when they would do any of the interviews and any of those things. It was, you could tell it was a really special and complex time in their lives and their careers.
And for 18 months, Dick lived at a hotel in London, and the stages were an hour away. Every day he drove out and back. I assume he wasn't smart enough just to get a hotel near the stages, but whatever. Anyway, and
He lived next to Margaret Thatcher.
He bought, maybe that's why it was. Maybe, I didn't know that. Maybe he also has, they have two cars. Still, I think the maroon
the
Rolls,
the Silver
and
Cloud,
then the black Rolls, with the wheel on the driver's side that he bought in England during the time, but he didn't drive them to the set or not. So
the one person that I've never met that I wanted to was his driver.
He was
the guy that drove Dick and Tom to and from the set is the one person I've always wanted to meet. I would have, and Dick would always had a line like, you know, that guy must have thought, I can't believe they're letting these two people be in charge of anything.
Right. Right now,
those drives were important because that's when Dick and Tom would work on the script.
Yep.
That's when they would come up with new ideas, or they would fix things, or they would work out the details of the story where they were going. So yeah, that commute,
and of course,
proved to be very important.
There was always this argument to this day. No one could satisfy who was right, but when Clark comes out of the front doors of the Daily Planet at night and sees Margot Kidder, Lois, hanging from the helicopter, he runs to the first phone booth that he can find. And at that point, we had these phone booths that weren't closed. They were open. And he just looks at it. And it's the biggest laugh in the film. And then he has to go run and do the go through the doors to change. But Dick wanted to take credit for that. Tom wanted to take credit for that. Who knows who wrote it? It might have even been in the Puzo script.
It was the craft service guy for sure.
I don't know.
But Tim, I don't know, guys, did you do in the documentary, did you do the story where Jeffrey Unsworth thought he caused the blackout?
Are you asking me?
In that?
I remember hearing that. Yes, it was. They were shooting in New York, and he was tapping into so much power to light up the night sky.
The front of the Daily Planet.
Yeah, and coincidentally, it timed with a massive blackout in New York, and I think
Dick was inside rehearsing with the actors, and Jeffrey had all of the generators rented out in all of New York City, and he wanted another piece of light or something.
Every light, and he needed the one extra light. So what they would do is, when no one was looking, they would unscrew the plate at the bottom of a street light and tap into that power. And so it
causes the blackout, but Dick's inside rehearsing with the people. And the generators are...
And there's a blackout in all of New York for how many hours? And Dick let Jeffrey think for hours that he caused that blackout, which was not true.
Well, but Jeffrey had to go in because the generators were still lit up.
Yeah, they were still lit up.
Dick's inside rehearsing, and they're still lit. And Jeffrey, he said, Jeffrey come in and would tug on him and say, I need to talk to you. And he said, Jeffrey, I'm rehearsing. And he said, I really need to talk to you. I've done something. And so then they came out, and Jeffrey legitimately thought that they caused the blackout. And Dick never one to let anyone off the hook.
Dick
let him score for a long time.
I mean, he does that. He's the biggest practical joker there is.
Well, I think this is a good, because we're talking about Tom Mankiewicz, it's a good time to ask you guys about the audio commentary those Tom and Dick are the two you chose to do the audio commentary. Is that right? Talk about that. Bring them in and recording that, Jonathan.
Jonathan.
That was we recorded that, I think, because Dick
At
was
a house,
remodeling his house. It was a
right,
rental house in
in
Beverly
Bel Air.
Hills, and Tom and Dick came. Tom came to Dick's house, and it was Michael and myself, and Jeff Johns was there, and we brought in a
I think Paul
portable
was there
audio
too.
engineer, and we put the film up on the TV there, and put mics in front of them, and the two of them just had at it. It was a great. I think it's probably was one of the first times in who knows since when that they actually sat together and watched the film and talked about it. So it was a great opportunity for the two of them to relive the film. And I'll never forget when we started. The movie famously has these really extravagant, long opening credit sequence, and Dick said, "Man, we would never do that now." But nobody could sit through the opening credits like this anymore. We would have gone right into the movie.
They were.
I remember him.
It was very exciting credits as well too. The music
Oh
was
yeah,
Richard Greenberg,
right,
yes,
right.
yep,
who was
yeah.
one of Dick's best friends till the day he passed. Like, I mean,
And
that
and
there was so
and
many of those relationships that were built on that movie that stayed forever.
and Greenberg has done the main titles on just an insane amount of films. The Shadow is one of the ones that I think about. But Simplicity as well too.
Yep.
Well, the other thing I wanted to ask you about then is the audio commentary was recorded. You had the other featurettes all done, the documentary featurettes. You had the film. When did you guys talk about doing the extended version, or when did that, or how did you kind of do the coordination of those different versions of the restoration? And was that also always part of the plan, Jonathan, in terms of the pitch for the DVD?
I think it was always intent. There was always going to be this extended version, which was a hybrid or reduced down version of what Michael mentioned earlier about the TV version that was done. And I remember that TV version as a kid because it was the highlight of the year when it showed on ABC for 2 nights, Sunday and Monday, and
And it
they
was so
added a
long they
lot.
had to put it in
eh,
two parts.
Yeah, because they added a lot more during the
ABC,
earthquake sequence, and
The hyenas,
hyenas, the Girl
Indian,
Scouts.
the Indian, the
Oh yeah,
Indian,
that
Indian tribe.
Margot's interviewing.
No, no.
um,
The deal was that they had this technology that Jonathan introduced me to that gave me this idea, which allowed you on the same DVD to be able to
Seamless
choose
branching.
the theatrical version with the new mix and the restoration of the picture, or the longer version.
Right,
So I
right.
had
follow the white rabbit.
meticulously planned out where those seamless branches would go, and theoretically, it it wouldn't stagger at that point where it goes to the different version. It would just seamlessly branch. And I'm in San Antonio, and we're previewing the film because they were thinking about giving it a theatrical release. And I get a call from the head lawyer at Warner Brothers, the second in command in law, and said, I want to start out this conversation that it's attorney-client privilege, and I'm probably breaking that privilege right now by telling you this, but he said, we can't put out the seamless branching version. So we've spent all this money. We're just going to put out the extended version. And I'm like beside myself because I never wanted anyone to see that longer version except the real freaks. the 2 hour and 43-minute version was too long to begin with. I wanted it to be shorter. I wanted to cut out those two scenes that I mentioned earlier. And because it was too long of a film. 2 hours and 43 minutes is too long to expect someone to sit in their seat, no matter how exciting the fucking film is. Put an intermission in the middle of it. Do something, but anyway.
Do you have a copy?
I don't know. For me, it was the perfect movie, so I don't know.
Do you have a copy of the branching thing?
No.
Michael?
No, I never got. I
need new coasters.
I think, Michael, I think what was going on at the time, there was a discrepancy, or there was a disagreement as to who owned the patent or the rights for seamless branching technology.
I know exactly. The guy that developed the technology that at the beginning of a DVD, you can't fast forward through the disclaimer saying you can't use this film in
the FBI
format. He developed that. He also had developed the seamless branching technology, and all 5 studios at the time were scared to death by being sued by this guy because he would have won. Anyway, so we couldn't.
Jonathan was able to use branching on another film where he did probably the best use of it that I've ever seen. In the Matrix, another Warner Brothers feature, but I remember showing the Follow the White Rabbit thing to Dick and Lauren to explain to them how people were experiencing things now, and how you could make those things go together. And it was a really well done version of it, and I wish that you could still do more of that today, because it was such an interesting avenue that never really matured.
Anyway,
we got to use that technology again, seamless branching technology, on the Goonies when we did the picture-in-picture commentary with Dick and all the kids.
Oh, you could
that it's seamlessly.
That's another podcast, and that's a great one, because that was a hell of a.
Yeah. So, Jonathan, this is a huge release for Paul and his group there at Warner Brothers Home Entertainment. I'm sure there was a lot of, anxiety as well as excitement about what this was going to do once it hit the market and they're promoting it. Do you recall how well did it do, and what was the response from the home video team there at Warner Brothers? And then I'll ask you, Derek, about from the Donners. But first with you, Jonathan.
I mean, there was a lot of high expectations for it. It was a beloved film. It was probably one of the most requested films from the catalog to be re-released and remastered and to do documentaries on. And I remember also when we were doing the mix, there was a lot of interest from all the home theater magazines back from then that wanted to do stories, and we invited one of the magazines to come and cover us during the mix, doing that, and the Warner publicity team really embraced the opportunity. They saw that what was being done with this and how big of a release it was going to be, and we ended up doing there was a Laserdisc store in Studio City called Dave's Laser, and was kind of like the community hub for cinephiles and fans of Laserdisc, and then the burgeoning DVD market as well. And we had a signing set up with Tom and Dick. We're going to be there signing copies of the DVD, and the lines were out the door and down the block and around the block. And I think that really kind of impressed upon Dick and Tom just how beloved this film was, and the fan base for it that still existed and still clamored for this movie. And I think from there was that started the groundswell and the ball rolling on the publicity that this release got for Warner's and for Dick and Tom. And it was the chance for them they got to tell the story from their perspective, for the first time, which I think was very important to them, their experience
on the
there.
talks and on the commentary.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
all the studios back then were famous for not releasing the financials on their home video releases. So maybe now we could look it up and see how much it made, but back then they wouldn't. They didn't want to share the profits with the agents and the actors and the talent involved. So
It was the great gold rush of the DVD industry back in that time, and studios were making money hand over fist on DVDs and releasing the older films. And there was understandably a lot of questions about, okay, well, who should be participating in all that, because DVD didn't exist back in the days when these contracts were all written for filmmakers and actors. And
yeah,
so
Dick was signed in 76, 77.
yeah.
The Salkind sold off almost all their rights just to keep on getting money to finance the two films from Warner Brothers. So at the end of the day, they only had like some foreign rights and the TV rights, the ABC TV rights, which they pre-sold as well too to get the money to finish the films.
So, Derek, what was the mood there at the office, and Dick's take on just the fan response to that first Superman release?
Well, it was actually very interesting because the fan response. I remember the Dave's Laserdisc. They remember there was two people brought babies, and Dick's not a big baby person, and but he was like overcome with people wanted him to meet their baby because that movie had meant something to them. And I have a picture of him holding a baby and looking, there's an incredulous look on his face, which is like, why would you give me a baby? But also why, like, and he talked to these people for a long time and they had these conversations. And I remember, also the gentleman, and I'm Aaron Smolinski, is it? Who played the young Kal-El.
Yeah.
He came. He was there, and Dick and Tom saw him, and there was such that place was packed.
The teenage Clark.
The baby, the baby, the one that held the thing, and they hadn't seen him, and the place was packed, and it really did. Dick never did conventions and things like that. It was always, if he would do a screening, people always wanted to talk to him afterwards and everything. But seeing people line up to come see this, and they would talk about the technical things that were being done on the disc, and they were talking about what they were excited about, and which blew his mind, like that they would be so interested in the minutia of what Michael and Jonathan were doing. And I remember leaving that particular event and him being like just sort of bowled over. There was also, I'll be honest, there was a bit of melancholy is not the right. There was a disappointment in, and you guys can speak to this more about. There was going to be a feature, like they showed it in a movie theater, and still have that silver poster in San Antonio.
Yeah, that's where it was when I got that call.
And they did it, but there was no marketing around the fact that they were releasing the film in the theater.
And 6 TV ads, and they told me when they were on, and they were on TV.
Dick was disappointed because there was such a swell, and this was so great, and there was such a fan involvement, and as he would call it, a want to see, and then they didn't really do a great job of marketing the San Antonio screening. And then they said, well, we can't justify re-releasing the film because the one theater in San Antonio didn't do great business. And it was that thing of, as I was saying, how he could never get too involved because there's such a vulnerability, especially with this movie and with Warner Brothers and everything. And so it was another example of the cresting of the mountain. And then, I think would feel of like the Lucy and the football effect of, well, you got me all excited, you got me hooked into this thing, and I'm ready to go push for it. Oh, and then
You pull the
And then you pull it because of that reason. And we could have, and Dick was like, look, I could have been doing ads. We could have been doing spots. We could have pushed. We could have, if all those people that showed up to a Laserdisc store with their babies knew that this version of the movie was coming out in the theater.
Yeah,
we,
but
we could
you
do a
need
good job of getting it out there.
to go to the theaters, not just.
Oh, sure. But his point was that you could have, if you're going to use the numbers from the San Antonio screening, you could have done a better job at the San Antonio screening. If you wanted to get bad numbers at a San Antonio screening,
no doubt,
then that was a way to do it.
Well, guys, I have one more question to kind of wrap up this discussion of the Superman film and the restoration for the DVD. And just for the listeners to know, we will be having another podcast where we talk about Superman 2 and the Richard Donner cut. But just one last question here for Superman. What are we looking at? 23 years since you worked on this back in 2000.
The
DVD,
but the
yes,
came out in 78. So now you're talking.
Oh, right. I'm talking about the DVD release. But what are your thoughts when you look back on that time period and everything, and just the response from the fans and everything, and just being a part of that, Jonathan?
I mean, I can still recall seeing the film in theaters in '78 with my dad, and it was such an indelible moment in my life. And I remember being able to tell Dick that to this day is one of the most cherished memories I have with my father, is going to see him, taking me to see that movie in '78, and he was deeply moved by hearing about that, and I felt such a honor and privilege to be attached and to work on this film and to tell the story for it. And it's one of my most proudest achievements in my career. I have a signed poster that hung in my office for my entire time at Warner Brothers, and um, it's and again, it kicked off a multi-year, multi-film relationship with Dick, working on his films, and I got to know him really well, and Derek, and from that, and I'm just it was just an honor and a privilege to be able to work on this film, and to bring the love that I had for the film, and infuse that into the content, into the documentaries, into the remastering, and I think that um, it was just the dream come true, and I'm happy that it resonated, and that the fans and Dick and Tom, responded so positively to it. I couldn't have asked for a better response to it.
Nope.
Eric?
Oh, I'm a remora, swimming with the sharks here, and these two guys, I think it was to come in. That was sort of right as I was coming into the orbit and becoming a member of the Donner Mafia, as it's been called, and to see what Jonathan and Michael were able to do, and to see, and as time has passed, to be able to understand the trust that Dick had in them, and to see what I think as a fan was such a great job that they did, and such a great, piece to keep this movie alive and to tell the story, but also just to, zhuzh it up and give it, the things that it needed. I think it's a real highlight in the evolution of how movies are presented.
Michael?
Okay, so Dick always has spare copies of his posters that when someone comes in or someone special, he'll sign with a silver marker, personally write something personal to him or her. And I was dating a gal that presented herself to Dick as my fiance, but she was just my girlfriend at the time. But she went around and she got Dick to sign a poster that I have on my wall to this day. And it's the original poster. And it says, "Michael, you made him fly again. Dick Donner."
That's awesome. Yeah.
That says it all.
Wow. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. The behind-the-scenes story to Superman 1 and 2 is just so compelling. And hearing it from those who knew director Dick Donner and produced the restoration is as good as it gets. And just a reminder that there will be a second podcast coming soon where we deep dive into the Richard Donner cut. So if you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to do that when you get the chance. For those of you who would like to purchase the new 4K 5-film Superman box set or the individual 4K release of Superman, there are links in the podcast show notes and on our website at www.theextras.tv. So be sure and check those out. If you're on social media, be sure and follow the show on Facebook or Twitter at The Extras TV or Instagram at theextras.tv to continue the conversation and to be a part of our community. And you're invited to our Facebook group for fans of Warner Brothers films called Warner Archive and Warner Brothers Catalog Group. So look for that link on the Facebook page or in the podcast show notes. Until next time, you've been listening to Tim Millard. Stay slightly obsessed.